Chapter 7 of Tom Swift and His Sky Racer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Sky Racer, by Victor Appleton. Chapter 7, Seeking a Clue. John Sharp was more than surprised at the effect his piece of information had on Tom Swift. Though the young inventor had all along suspected Andy of having the missing plans, yet there had been no positive evidence on this point. That, coupled with the fact that the red-haired bully had not been seen in the vicinity of Shopton lately, had, in a measure, lulled Tom's suspicions to rest, but now his hope had been rudely shattered. "Do you really think that that's his game?" asked Mr. Sharp. "I'm sure of it," replied the youth. "Though where he is building his aeroplane I can't imagine, for I haven't seen him in town. He's away." "Are you sure of that?" "Well, not absolutely sure," replied Tom. "It's the general rumor that he's out of town." "Well, old General Rumor is sometimes a person not to be relied upon," remarked the balloonist grimly. "Now this is the way I size it up. Of course, all I know officially is that Andy Foger has sent in an entry for the big race for the $10,000 prize which is offered by the Eagle Park Aviation Association. I'm a member of the arrangements committee, and so I know. I also know that you and several others are going to try for the prize. That's all I am absolutely sure of. Now, when you tell me about the missing plans, and you conclude that Andy is doing some underhanded work, I agree with you. But I go a step farther. I don't believe he's out of town at all." "Why not?" exclaimed Tom. "Because when he has an airship shed right in his own backyard, where, you tell me, he once made a craft in which he tried to beat you out in a trip to Alaska, when you think of that, doesn't it seem reasonable that he'd use that same building in which to make his new craft?" "Yes, it does," admitted Tom slowly, "but then everybody says he's out of town." "Well, what everybody says is generally not so. I think you'll find that Andy is keeping himself in seclusion, and that he's working secretly in his shop, building a machine with which to beat you." "Do you, really?" "I certainly do. Have you been around his place lately?" "No. I've been too busy; and then I never have much to do with him." "Then take my advice, and see if you can't get a look inside that shop. You may see something that will surprise you. If you find that Andy is infringing on your patented ideas, you can stop him by an injunction. You've got this model patented, I take it?" "Oh, yes. I didn't have at the time the plans were stolen, but I've patented it since. I could get at him that way." "Then take my advice, and do it. Get a look inside that shed, and you'll find Andy working secretly there, no matter if his cronies do think he's out of town." "I believe I will," agreed Tom, and somehow he felt better now that he had decided on a plan of action. He and the balloonist talked over at some length just the best way to go about it, for the young inventor recalled the time when he and Ned Newton had endeavored to look into Andy's shed, with somewhat disastrous results to themselves; but Tom knew that the matter at stake justified a risk, and he was willing to take it. "Well, now that's settled," said Mr. Sharp, "tell me more about yourself and your aeroplane. My! To think that the Red Cloud was destroyed! That was a fine craft." Indeed she was, agreed Tom. I'm going to make another on similar lines, some day, but now all my time is occupied with the Hummingbird. She is a hummer, too, complimented Mr. Sharp. But I almost forgot the real object of my trip here. There is no doubt about you going in the race, is there? I fully expect to, replied Tom. The only thing that will prevent me will be— Don't say you're worried on account of what Andy Foger may do, interrupted Mr. Sharp. I'm not. I'll attend to Andy, all right. I was going to say that my father's illness might interfere. He's not well at all. I'm quite worried about him. Oh, I sincerely hope he'll be all right, remarked the balloonist. We want you in this race. In fact, we're going to feature you, as they say about the actors and story writers. The committee is planning to do considerable advertising on the strength of Tom Swift, the well-known young inventor, being a contestant for the $10,000 prize. That's very nice, I'm sure, replied Tom, and I'm going to do my best. Perhaps Dad will take a turn for the better. He wants me to win as much as I want to myself. Well, we'll not worry about it, anyhow, until the time comes. I want to show you some new features of my latest aeroplane. And I want to see them, Tom. Don't you think you're making a mistake, though, in equipping it with a wireless outfit? Why so? Well, because it will add to the weight, and you want such a small machine to be as light as possible. Yes, but you see I have a very light engine. That part my father helped me with. In fact, it is the lightest air-cooled motor made, for the amount of horsepower it develops, so I can afford to put on the extra weight of the wireless outfit. I may need to signal when I am flying along at 100 miles an hour. That's so. Well, show me some of the other good points. You've certainly got a wonderful craft here. Tom and Mr. Sharp spent some time going over the Hummingbird and talking over old times. The balloonist paid another visit to Mr. Swift, who was feeling pretty good, and who expressed his pleasure in seeing his old friend again. "Can't you stay for a few days?" asked Tom, when Mr. Sharp was about to leave. "If you wait long enough you may be able to help me work up the clues against Andy Foger, and also witness a trial flight of the Hummingbird." "I'd like to stay, but I can't," was the answer. "The committee will be anxious for me to get back with my report. Good luck to you. I'll see you at the time of the race, if not before." Tom resolved to get right to work seeking clues against his old enemy, Andy, but the next day Mr. Swift was not so well, and Tom had to remain in the house. Then followed several days, during which time it was necessary to do some important work on his craft, and so a week passed without any information having been obtained. In the meanwhile Tom had made some cautious inquiries, but had learned nothing about Andy. He had no chance to interview Pete or Sam, the two cronies, and he did not think it wise to make a bald request for information at the Foger home. Ned Newton could not be of any aid to his friend, as he was kept busy in the bank night and day, working over a new set of books. "I wonder how I can find out what I want to know," mused Tom one afternoon, when he had done considerable work on the Hummingbird. "I certainly ought to do it soon, so as to be able to stop Andy if he's infringing on my patents. Yet, I don't see how." His thoughts were interrupted by hearing a voice outside the shop, exclaiming: "Bless my toothpick! I know the way, Eradicate, my good fellow. It isn't necessary for you to come. As long as Tom Swift is out there, I'll find him. Bless my horizontal rudder! I'm anxious to see what progress he's made. I'll find him, if he's about." "Yes, sah, he's right in dere," spoke the colored man. "He's workin' on dat dragonfly of his." Eradicate did not always get his names right. "Mr. Damon!" exclaimed Tom in delight, at the sound of his friend's voice. "I believe he can help me get evidence against Andy Foger. I wonder I didn't think of it before. The very thing. I'll do it." End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Tom Swift and His Sky Racer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Sky Racer, by Victor Appleton. Chapter 8, The Empty Shed. "Bless my dark lantern! Where are you, Tom?" called Mr. Damon as he entered the dim shed where the somewhat frail-appearing aeroplane loomed up in the semi-darkness, for it was afternoon, and rather cloudy. "Where are you?" "Here," called the young inventor. "I'm glad to see you. Come in." "Ah, there it is, eh?" exclaimed the odd man, as he looked at the aeroplane, for there had been much work done on it since he had last seen it. "Bless my parachute, Tom! But it looks as though you could blow it over." "It's stronger than it seems," replied the lad. "But, Mr. Damon, I've got something very important to talk to you about." Thereupon Tom told all about Mr. Sharp's visit, of Andy's entry in the big race, and of the suspicions of himself and the balloonist. "And what is it you wish me to do?" asked Mr. Damon. "Work up some clues against Andy Foger." "Good! I'll do it. I'd like to get ahead of that bully and his father, who once tried to wreck the bank I'm interested in. I'll help you, Tom. I'll play detective. Let me see. What disguise shall I assume? I think I'll take the part of a tramp. Bless my ham sandwich! That will be the very thing. I'll get some ragged clothes, let my beard grow again. You see I shaved it off since my last visit. And I'll go around to the Foger place and ask for work. Then I can get inside the shed and look around. How's that for a plan?" "It might be all right," agreed Tom, "only I don't believe you're cut out for the part of a tramp, Mr. Damon." "Bless my fingernails! Why not?" "Oh, well, it isn't very pleasant to go around in ragged clothes." "Don't mind about me. I'll do it." And the odd gentleman seemed quite delighted at the idea. He and Tom talked it over at some length, and then adjourned to the house, where Mr. Swift, who had seemed to improve in the last few days, was told of the plan. "Couldn't you go around after evidence just as you are?" asked the aged inventor. "I don't much care for this disguising business." "Oh, it's very necessary," insisted Mr. Damon earnestly. "Bless my gizzard, but it's very necessary. Why, if I went around the Foger place as I am now, they'd know me in a minute, and I couldn't find out what I want to know." "Well, if you keep on blessing yourself," said Tom, with a laugh, "they'll know you, no matter what disguise you put on, Mr. Damon." "That's so," admitted the eccentric gentleman. "I must break myself of that habit. I will. Bless my topknot! I'll never do it any more. Bless my trouser buttons!" "I'm afraid you'll never do it," exclaimed Tom. "It is rather hard," said Mr. Damon ruefully, as he realized what he had said. "But I'll do it. Bless—" He paused a moment, looked at Tom and his father, and then burst into a laugh. The habit was more firmly fastened on him than he was aware. For several hours Tom, his father and Mr. Damon discussed various methods of proceeding, and it was finally agreed that Mr. Damon should first try to learn what Andy was doing, if anything, without resorting to a disguise. "Then, if that doesn't work, I'll become a tramp," was the decision of the odd character. "I'll wear the raggedest clothes I can find, bless—" But he stopped in time. Mr. Damon took up his residence in the Swift household, as he had often done before, and for the next week he went and came as he pleased, sometimes being away all night. "It's no use, though," declared Mr. Damon at the end of the week. "I can't get anywhere near that shed, nor even a glimpse inside of it. I haven't been able to learn anything, either. There are 2 gardeners on guard all the while, and several times when I've tried to go in the side gate, they've stopped me." "Isn't there any news of Andy about town?" asked Tom. "I should think Sam or Pete would know where he is." "Well, I didn't ask them, for they'd know right away why I was inquiring," said Mr. Damon, "but it seems to me as if there was something queer going on. If Andy Foger is working in that shed of his, he's keeping mighty quiet about it. Bless my—" And once more he stopped in time. He was conquering the habit in a measure. "Well, what do you propose to do next?" asked Tom. "Disguise myself like a tramp, and go there looking for work," was the firm answer. "There are plenty of odd jobs on a big place such as the Foger family have. I'll find out what I want to know, you see." It seemed useless to further combat this resolution, and, in a few days Mr. Damon presented a very different appearance. He had on a most ragged suit, there was a scrubby beard on his face, and he walked with a curious shuffle, caused by a pair of big, heavy shoes which he had donned, first having taken the precaution to make holes in them and get them muddy. "Now I'm all ready," he said to Tom one day, when his disguise was complete. "I'm going over and try my luck." He left the house by a side door, so that no one would see him, and started down the walk. As he did so a voice shouted: "Hi, there! Git right out o' here! Mr. Swift don't allow no tramps here, and we ain't got no wuck for yo', and there ain't no cold victuals. I does all de wuck, me and my mule Boomerang, and we takes all de cold victuals, too. Git right along, now!" "It's Eradicate. He doesn't know you," said Tom, with a chuckle. "So much the better," whispered Mr. Damon. But the disguise proved almost too much of a success, for seeing the supposed tramp lingering near the house, Eradicate caught up a stout stick and rushed forward. He was about to strike the ragged man, when Tom called out: "That's Mr. Damon, Rad!" "What?" gasped the colored man; and when the situation had been explained to him, and the necessity for silence impressed upon him, he turned away, too surprised to utter a word. He sought consolation in the stable with his mule. Just what methods Mr. Damon used he never disclosed, but one thing is certain: that night there came a cautious knock on the door of the Swift home, and Tom, answering it, beheld his odd friend. "Well," he asked eagerly, "what luck?" "Put on a suit of old clothes, and come with me," said Mr. Damon. "We'll look like two tramps, and then, if we're discovered, they won't know it was you." "Have you found out anything?" asked Tom eagerly. "Not yet. But I've got a key to one of the side doors of the shed, and we can get in as soon as it's late enough so that everybody there will be in bed." "A key? How did you get it?" inquired the youth. "Never mind," was the answer, with a chuckle. "That's because of my disguise, and I haven't blessed anything today. I'm going to, soon, though. I can feel it coming on. But hurry, Tom, or we may be too late." "And you haven't had a look inside the shed?" asked the young inventor. "You don't know what's there?" "No. But we soon will." Eagerly Tom put on some of the oldest and most ragged garments he could find, and then he and the odd gentleman set off towards the Foger home. They waited some time after getting in sight of it, because they saw a light in one of the windows. Then, when the house was dark, they stole cautiously forward toward the big, gloomy shed. "On this side," directed Mr. Damon in a whisper. "The key I have opens this door." "But we can't see when we get inside," objected Tom. "I should have brought a dark lantern." "I have one of those pocket electric flashlights," said Mr. Damon. "Bless my candlestick, but I thought of that." And he chuckled gleefully. Cautiously they advanced in the darkness. Mr. Damon fumbled at the lock of the door. The key grated as he turned it. The portal swung back, and Tom and his friend found themselves inside the shed which, of late, had been such an object of worry and conjecture to the young inventor. What would he find there? "Flash the light," he called to Mr. Damon in a hoarse whisper. The eccentric man drew it from his pocket. He pressed the spring switch, and in an instant a brilliant shaft of radiance shot out, cutting the intense blackness like a knife. Mr. Damon flashed it on all sides. But to the amazement of Tom and his companion, it did not illuminate the broad white wings and stretches of canvas of an aeroplane. It only shone on the bare walls of the shed, and on some piles of rubbish in the corners. Up and down, to right and left, shot the pencil of light. There's nothing here," gasped Tom. I guess you're right," agreed Mr. Damon. "The shed's empty." "Then where is Andy Foger building his aeroplane?" asked Tom in a whisper. But Mr. Damon could not answer him. Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Tom Swift and His Sky Racer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Sky Racer, by Victor Appleton. Chapter 9. A Trial Flight. For a few moments after their exclamations of surprise Tom and Mr. Damon did not know what else to say. They stared about in amazement, hardly able to believe that the shed could be empty. They had expected to see some form of aeroplane in it, and Tom was almost sure his eyes would meet a reproduction of his hummingbird, made from the stolen plans. "Can it be possible there's nothing here?" went on Tom, after a long pause. He could not seem to believe it. "Evidently not," answered Mr. Damon, as he advanced toward the center of the big building and flashed the light on all sides. "You can see for yourself." Or, rather, you can't see, spoke the youth. It isn't here, that's sure. You can't stick an aeroplane, even as small a one as my hummingbird, in a corner. No, it isn't here. Well, we'll have to look further, went on Mr. Damon. I think... But a sudden noise near the big main doors of the shed interrupted him. "Come on!" exclaimed Tom in a whisper. "Someone's coming! They might see us. Let's get out!" Mr. Damon released the pressure on the spring switch, and the light went out. After waiting a moment to let their eyes become accustomed to the darkness, he and Tom stole to the door by which they had entered. As they swung it cautiously open, they again heard the noise near the main portals by which Andy had formerly taken in and out the Anthony, as he had named the aeroplane in which he and his father went to Alaska, where, like Tom's craft, it was wrecked. "Someone is coming in," whispered Tom. Hardly had he spoken when a light shone in the direction of the sound. The illumination came from a big lantern of the ordinary kind, carried by someone who had just entered the shed. "Can you see who it is?" whispered Mr. Damon, peering eagerly forward, too eagerly, for his foot struck against the wooden sidewall with a loud bang. "Who's there?" suddenly demanded the person carrying the lantern. He raised it high above his head, in order to cast the gleams into all the distant corners. As he did so a ray of light fell upon his face. "Andy Foger!" gasped Tom in a hoarse whisper. Andy must have heard, for he ran forward just as Tom and Mr. Damon slipped out. "Hold on! Who are you?" came in the unmistakable tones of the red-haired bully. "I don't think we're going to tell," chuckled Tom softly, as he and his friend sped off into the darkness. They were not followed, and as they looked back they could see a light bobbing about in the shed. "He's looking for us!" exclaimed Mr. Damon with an inward laugh. "Bless my watch chain! But it's a good thing we got in ahead of him. Are you sure it was Andy himself?" "Sure! I'd know his face anywhere. But I can't understand it. Where has he been? What is he doing? Where is he building his aeroplane? I thought he was out of town." "He may have come back tonight," said Mr. Damon. "That's the only one of your questions I can answer. We'll have to wait about the rest. I'm sure he wasn't around the house today, though, for I was working at weeding the flower beds, in my disguise as a tramp, and if he was home I'd have seen him. He must have just come back, and he went out to his shed to get something. Well, we did the best we could." "Indeed we did," agreed Tom, "and I'm ever so much obliged to you, Mr. Damon. And we'll try again, when we get more clues. Bless my shoelaces, but it's a relief to be able to talk as you like." And forthwith the eccentric man began to call down so many blessings on himself and on his belongings, no less than on his friends, that Tom laughingly warned him that he had better save some for another time. The two reached home safely, removed their disguises, and told Mr. Swift of the result of their trip. He agreed with them that there was a mystery about Andy's aeroplane which was yet to be solved. But Tom was glad to find that, at any rate, the craft was not being made in Shopton, and during the next 2 weeks he devoted all his time to finishing his own machine. Mr. Jackson was a valuable assistant, and Mr. Damon gave what aid he could. "Well, I think I'll be ready for a trial flight in another week," said Tom one day, as he stepped back to get a view of the almost completed Humming-Bird. "Shall you want a passenger?" asked Mr. Damon. "Yes, I wish you would take a chance with me. I could use a bag of sand, not that I mean you are to be compared to that," added Tom quickly, "but I'd rather have a real person, in order to test the balancing apparatus. Yes, We'll make a trial trip together." In the following few days Tom went carefully over the aeroplane, making some slight changes, strengthening it here and there, and testing the motor thoroughly. It seemed to work perfectly. At length the day of the trial came, and the Humming Bird was wheeled out of the shed. In spite of the fact that it was practically finished, there yet remained much to do on it. It was not painted or decorated, and looked rather crude. But what Tom wanted to know was how it would fly, what control he had over it, what speed it could make, and how it balanced. For it was, at best, very frail, and the least change in equilibrium might be fatal. Before taking his place in the operator's seat Tom started the motor, and by means of a spring balance tested the thrust of the propellers. It was satisfactory, though he knew that when the engine had been run for some time, and had warmed up, it would do much better. "All ready, I guess, Mr. Damon," he called, and the odd gentleman took his place. Tom got up into his own seat, in front of several wheels and levers by which he operated the craft. "Start the propeller," he requested of Mr. Jackson, and soon the motor was spitting fire, while the big, fan-like blades were whirring around like wings of light. The engineer and Eradicate were holding back the Humming Bird. "Let her go!" cried Tom as he turned on more gasoline and further advanced the spark of the motor. The roar increased, the propeller looked like a solid circle of wood, and the trim little monoplane moved slowly across the rising ground, increasing its speed every second, until, like some graceful bird, it suddenly rose in the air as Tom tilted the wing-tips, and soared splendidly aloft. End of Chapter 9. A Trial Flight. Chapter 10 of Tom Swift and His Sky Racer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Sky Racer, by Victor Appleton. Chapter 10, A Midnight Intruder. Tom Swift sent his wonderful little craft upward on a gentle slant. Higher and higher it rose above the ground. Now it topped the trees. Now it was well over them. On the earth below stood Mr. Swift, Mr. Jackson, Eradicate and Mrs. Baggert. They were the only witnesses of the trial flight, and as the aged inventor saw his son's latest design in aeroplanes circling in the air he gave a cheer of delight. It was too feeble for Tom to hear, but the lad, glancing down, saw his father waving his hand to him. "Dear old Dad," thought Tom, waving in return. "I hope he's well enough to see me win the big prize." Tom and Mr. Damon went skimming easily through the air, at no great speed, to be sure, for the young inventor did not want to put too sudden a strain on his motor. "This is glorious!" cried the odd gentleman. "I never shall have enough of aeroplaning, Tom." "Nor I, either," added his companion. "But how do you like it? Don't you think it's an improvement on my Butterfly, Mr. Damon?" "It certainly is. You're a wonder, Tom! Look out! What are you up to?" For the machine had suddenly swerved in a startling manner. "Oh, that's just a new kind of spiral dip I was trying," answered Tom. "I couldn't do that with my other machine, for I couldn't turn sharp enough." "Well, don't do it right away again," begged Mr. Damon, who had turned a little white, and whose breath was coming in gasps, even though he was used to hair-raising stunts in the frail craft of the air. Tom did not take his machine far away, for he did not want to exhibit it to the public yet, and he preferred to remain in the vicinity of his home, in case of any accident. So he circled around, did figures of 8, went up and down on long slants, took sharp turns, and gave the craft a good try-out. Does it satisfy you?" asked Mr. Damon, when Tom had once more made the spiral dip, but not at high speed. "In a way, yes," was the answer. "I see a chance for several changes and improvements. Of course, I know nothing about the speed yet, and that's something I'm anxious about, for I built this with the idea of breaking all records, and nothing else. I know, now, that I can construct a craft that will successfully navigate the air. In fact, there are any number of people who can do that. But to construct a monoplane that will beat anything ever before made is a different thing. I don't yet know that I have done it." "When will you?" "Oh, when I make some changes, get the motor tuned up better, and let her out for all she's worth. I want to do 100 miles an hour, at least. I'll arrange for a speedy flight in about 2 weeks more." "Then I think I will stay home," said Mr. Damon. "No, I'll need you," insisted Tom, laughing. "Now watch. I'm going to let her out just a little." He did, with the result that they skimmed through the air so fast that Mr. Damon's breath became a mere series of gasps. "We'll have to wear goggles and mouth protectors when we really go fast," yelled Tom above the noise of the motor, as he slowed down and turned about for home. "Go fast? Wasn't that fast?" asked Mr. Damon. Tom shook his head. "You wait, and you'll see," he announced. They made a good landing, and Mr. Swift hastened up to congratulate his son. "I knew you could do it, Tom!" he cried. "I couldn't, though, if it hadn't been for that wonderful engine of yours, Dad. How do you feel?" "Pretty good. Oh, but that's a fine machine, Tom!" "It certainly is," agreed Mr. Jackson. "It will be when I have it in better trim," admitted the young inventor modestly. "By golly!" cried Eradicate, who was grinning almost from ear to ear, "I's proud of yo', Massa Tom, and so will mah mule Boomerang be, when I tells him. Yes, sah, dat's what he will be. Proud ob yo', Massa Tom." "Thanks, Rad." "Well, some folks is satisfied with mighty little under 'em, when they go up in the air, that's my opinion," said Mrs. Baggert. "Why, wouldn't you ride in this?" asked Tom of the buxom housekeeper. "Not if you was to give me $10,000!" she cried firmly. "Oh, dear! I think the potatoes are burning!" And she rushed back into the house. The next day Tom started to work overhauling the Humming Bird, and making some changes. He altered the wing tips slightly, and adjusted the motor, until in a thrust test it developed nearly half again as much power as formerly. "And I'll need it all," declared Tom as he thought of the number of contestants that had entered the great race. For the Eagle Park meet was to be a large and important one, and the principal birdmen of the world were to have a part in it. Tom knew that he must do his very best, and he spared no efforts to make his monoplane come up to his ideal, which was a very exacting one. "We'll have a real speed test tomorrow," Tom announced to Mr. Damon one night. "I'll see what the Humming Bird can really do. You'll come, won't you?" "Oh, I suppose so. Bless my insurance policy! I might as well take the same chance you do, but if you're going to have such a nerve-wracking thing as that on the program, you better get to bed early and have plenty of sleep." "Oh, I'm not tired. I think I'll go out this evening." "Where?" "Oh, just around town, to see some of the fellows." But if Tom was only going around town merely to see his male friends, why did he dress so carefully, put on a new necktie, and take several looks in the glass before he went out? We think you can guess, and also the girl's name. The young inventor got in rather late, and after a visit to the aeroplane shed, to see that all was right there, he went to bed, first connecting up the burglar alarm wires that guarded the doors and windows of the aerodrome. How long he had been asleep Tom did not know, but he was suddenly awakened by hearing the buzzing of the alarm at the head of his bed. At first he took it for the droning and humming of the aeroplane motor, as he had a hazy notion, and a sort of dream, that he was in his craft. Then, with a start, he realized what it was: the burglar alarm. "Someone's in the shed!" he gasped. Out of bed he leaped, drawing on his trousers and coat, and putting on a pair of slippers, with speed worthy of a fireman. He grabbed up a revolver and rushed from his room, pounding on the door of Mr. Jackson's apartment in passing. "Someone in the shed, after the Hummingbird!" shouted Tom. "Get a gun, and come down!" End of Chapter 10. A Midnight Intruder.
Chapter 11 of Tom Swift and His Sky Racer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Sky Racer by Victor Appleton. Chapter 11. Tom is Hurt. As Tom passed down the hall on his way to the side door, from which he could more quickly reach the aeroplane shed, he saw his father coming from his room. "What's the matter? What is it?" asked Mr. Swift, and alarm showed on his pale face. "It's nothing much, Dad," said the youth, as quietly as he could, for he realized that to excite his father might have a bad effect on the invalid. "Then why are you in such a hurry? Why have you that revolver? I know there is something wrong, Tom. I'm going to help you." In his father's present weakened state, Tom desired this least of all, so he said, "Now never mind, Dad. I thought I heard a noise out in the yard, and I'm not going to take any chances. So I roused Mr. Jackson, and I'm going down to see what it is. Perhaps it may only be Eradicate's mule, Boomerang, kicking around, or it may be Rad himself, or someone after his chickens. Don't worry, Mr. Jackson and I can attend to it. You go back to bed, Father." Tom spoke with such assurance that Mr. Swift believed him, and retired to his room, just as the engineer, partly dressed, came hurrying out in response to Tom's summons. He had his rifle, and had the invalid inventor seen that, he surely would have worried more. "Come on," whispered Tom. "Don't make any noise. I don't want to excite my father." "What was it?" asked the engineer. "I don't know. Burglar alarm went off. That's all I can say until we get to the shed." Together the two left the house softly, and soon were hurrying toward the aeroplane shed. "Look!" exclaimed Mr. Jackson. "Didn't you see a light just then, Tom?" "Where?" "By the side window of the shed." "No, I didn't notice it. Oh, yes, there it is. Someone is in there. If it's Andy Folger, I'll have him arrested, sure." "Maybe we can't catch him." "That's so. Andy is a pretty slippery customer. Say, Mr. Jackson, you go around and get Eradicate, and have him bring a club. We can't trust him with a gun. Tell him to get at the back door, and I'll wait for you to join me, and we'll go in the front door. Then we'll have 'em between two fires. They can't get away. How about the windows? They're high up and hard to open, since I put the new catches on them. Whoever got in must have forced the lock of the door. There goes the light again." As Tom spoke, there was seen the faint glimmer of a light. It moved slowly about the interior of the shed, and with a peculiar bobbing motion, which indicated someone was carrying it. "Go for Eradicate, and don't make any more noise than you can help in waking him up," whispered Tom, for they were now close to the shed, and might be heard. Mr. Jackson slipped off in the darkness, and Tom drew nearer to the building that housed his Hummingbird. There was one window lower than the others, and near it was a box that Tom remembered having seen that afternoon. He planned to get up on that and look in, before making a raid to capture the intruder. Tom raised himself up to the window. The light had been visible a moment before he placed the box in position, but an instant later it seemed to go out, and the place was in darkness. "I wonder if they've gone away," thought Tom. "I can't hear any noise." He listened intently. It was dark and silent in the shop. Suddenly the light flashed up brighter than before, and the young inventor caught sight of a man walking around the new aeroplane, examining it carefully. He carried, as Tom could see, a large-sized electric flash lamp with a brilliant tungsten filament, which gave a powerful light. As the youth watched, he saw the intruder place the light on a bench in such a position that the rays fell full upon the hummingbird. Then, adjusting the spring switch so that the light would continue to glow, the man stepped back and drew something from an inner pocket. "I wonder what he's up to," mused Tom. "I wish Eradicate and Mr. Jackson would hurry back. Who can that fellow be, I wonder? I've never seen him before, as far as I know. I thought sure it was going to turn out to be Andy Folger." Tom turned around to look into the dark yard surrounding the shed. He was anxious to hear the approach of his two allies, but there was no sound of their footsteps. As he turned back to watch the man, he could not repress a cry of alarm, for what the intruder had drawn from his pocket was a small hatchet, and he was advancing with it toward the hummingbird. "He's going to destroy my aeroplane," gasped Tom, and he raised his revolver to fire. He did not intend to shoot at the man, but only to fire to scare him, and thus hasten the coming of Mr. Jackson and the colored man. But there was no need for this, for an instant later the two came running up silently, Eradicate with a big club. "Where am he?" asked in a hoarse whisper. "Let me get at him, Massa Tom." "Hush!" exclaimed the young inventor. "We have no time to lose. He's in there getting ready to chop my airplane to bits. Go to the back door, Rad, and if he comes out, don't let him get away." "I won't," declared the colored man emphatically, and he shook his club suggestively. "Come on, we'll go in the front door," whispered Tom to the engineer. "I have the key. We'll catch him red-handed and hand him over to the police." Waiting a few seconds to enable Eradicate to get to his place, Tom and the engineer stole softly toward the big double doors. Every moment the youth expected to hear the crash of the hatchet upon his prized machine. He shivered in anticipation, but the blows did not fall. Tom pushed open the door and stepped inside, followed by Mr. Jackson. As they did so, they saw the man standing in front of the hummingbird. He again raised the little hatchet, which was like an Indian tomahawk, and poised it for an instant over the delicate framework and planes of the aircraft. Then his arm began to descend. "Stop!" yelled Tom, and at the same time he fired in the air. The man turned as suddenly as though a bullet had struck him, and for a moment Tom was afraid lest he had hit him by accident. But an instant later the intruder grabbed up his flashlight, and holding it before him so that its rays shone full on Tom and Mr. Jackson, while it left him in the shadow, sprang toward them, the hatchet still in his hand. "Look out, Tom!" cried Mr. Jackson. "Out of my way!" shouted the man. Bravely Tom stood his ground. He wished now that he had a club instead of his revolver. The would-be vandal was almost upon him. Mr. Jackson clubbed his rifle and swung it at the fellow. The latter dodged and came straight at Tom. "Look out!" yelled the engineer again, but it was too late. There was the sound of a blow, and Tom went down like a log. Then the place was in darkness, for the sound of footsteps in rapid flight could be heard outside the shed. The intruder, after wounding the young inventor, had made his escape. End of chapter 11. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas. Chapter 12 of Tom Swift and his Sky Racer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and his Sky Racer by Victor Appleton. Chapter 12. Miss Nestor Calls. "What's the matter? Shall I come in? Anybody heard it?" yelled Eradicate Sampson as he pounded on the rear door of the aeroplane shed. "Let me in, Massa Tom." "All right, wait a minute, I'm coming," called Mr. Jackson. He tried to peer through the darkness to where a huddled heap indicated the presence of Tom. Then he thought of the electric lights, which were run by a storage battery when the dynamo was shut down, and a moment later the engineer had switched on the incandescents, filling the big shed with radiance. "Tom, are you badly hurt?" gasped Mr. Jackson. There was no answer, for Tom was unconscious. "Let me in! Let me get at that robber with my club!" cried the colored man eagerly. Knowing that he would need help in carrying Tom to the house, Mr. Jackson hurried to the back door. He had a key to it, and it was quicker to open it than to send Eradicate away around the shed to the front portals. "Where am he?" gasped the faithful darky as he took a firmer grasp of his club and looked around the place. "Let me get my hands on him. I'll feed him the boomerang when I gets through with him." "He's gone," said the engineer. "Help me look after Tom. I'm afraid he's badly hurt." They hastened to the unconscious lad. On one side of his head was a bad cut, which was bleeding freely. "Oh, he's dead, I know he's dead," wailed Eradicate. "Not a bit of it. He isn't dead, but he may die if we don't get him into the house and have a doctor here soon," said Mr. Jackson sternly. "Catch hold of him, Rad, and mind, don't carry on and get excited and scare Mr. Swift. Just pretend it isn't very bad, or we'll have two patients on our hands instead of only Tom." They managed to get the youth into the house, and contrary to their fears, Mr. Swift was not nearly so nervous as they had expected. Calmly he took charge of matters, and even telephoned for Dr. Gladby himself, while Mr. Jackson and Eradicate undressed Tom and got him to bed. Mrs. Baggert busied herself heating water and getting things in readiness for the doctor, who had promised to come at once. Tom was just regaining consciousness when the physician came in, having driven over at top speed. What happened? Did the Hummingbird fall?" asked Tom in a whisper, putting his hand to his head. "No, something fell on you, I guess," said the doctor, who had been hurriedly told of the circumstances. "But don't worry, Tom. You'll be all right in a few days. You've got a bad cut on the head, but the skull isn't fractured, I'm glad to say. Here, now, just drink this," and he gave Tom some medicine he had mixed in a glass. The cut was soon dressed, and Tom felt much better, though weak and a trifle dizzy. "Did he hit me with a hatchet?" he asked Mr. Jackson. "I couldn't tell," was the engineer's reply. "It all happened so quickly. In another instant I'd have bowled him over, instead of him landing on you, but I just missed him. He either used a hatchet or some blunt instrument." "Well, don't talk about it now," urged the doctor. "I want Tom to get quiet and go to sleep. We'll be much better in the morning, but I must forbid any aeroplane flights." And he shook his finger at Tom in warning. "You'll have to lie quiet for several days," he added. "All right," agreed the young inventor weakly, and then he dozed off, for the physician had given him a quieting medicine. "Haven't you any idea who it was?" asked Dr. Gladby of Mr. Jackson as he prepared to leave. "Not the slightest. It was no one Tom or I had ever seen before. But whoever it was, he intended to destroy the Hummingbird. That was evident." "The scoundrel! I'm glad you foiled him in time, but it's too bad about Tom. However, we'll soon have him all right again." "I knows who done it," broke in Eradicate, who was a sort of privileged character about the Swift home. "Who?" asked Mr. Jackson. "It was that Andy Foger. Leastways, he sent that man here to make mincemeat of the Hummingbird." I's as positive about that, so I am," and Eradicate grinned triumphantly. "Well, perhaps Andy did have a hand in it," admitted Mr. Swift, "but we have no proof of it. I can't see what his object would be in wanting to destroy Tom's new craft." "Pure meanness. Afraid that Tom will beat him in the race," suggested Mr. Jackson. "It's too big a risk to take," went on the aged inventor. "I'm inclined to think it might be one of the gang of men who made the diamonds in the cave in the mountains. They might have sent a spy on east, and he might try to damage the aeroplane to be revenged for what Tom and Mr. Jenks did to them." "It's possible," agreed the engineer. "Well, we'll wait until Tom can talk, and we'll go over it with him." "Not until he's stronger, though," stipulated the physician as he went away. "Don't excite Tom for a few days." The young inventor was much better the following day, and when Dr. Gadby called, he said Tom could sit up for a little while. 2 days later Tom was well enough to be talked to, and his father and Mr. Jackson went over all the details of the matter. Mr. Damon, who had returned home, came to see his friend as soon as he heard of his plight, and was also a member of the consulting party. "Bless my dictionary!" exclaimed the eccentric man. "I wish I had been here to take a hand in it. But, Tom, do you believe it was one of the diamond-making gang?" "I hardly think so," was the reply. "They would take some other means of revenge than by destroying my new aeroplane. I'm inclined to think it was someone who is in with Andy Foger." "Then we'll hire detectives and locate him and them," declared Mr. Damon, blessing several things in succession. Tom, however, did not like that plan, and it was decided to do nothing right away. In another few days Tom was able to be up, though he was still a semi-invalid, not venturing out of the house. It was one afternoon, when rather tired of his confinement, he was wishing he could resume work on his aircraft, that Mrs. Baggert came in and said, "Someone to see you, Tom." "Is it Mr. Damon?" "No, it's a lady. She—" "Oh, Tom, how are you?" cried a girlish voice, and Mary Nestor walked into the room, holding out both hands to the young inventor. Tom, with a blush, arose hastily. "No, no, sit still," commanded the girl. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about your accident. In fact, I only heard this morning. We've been away, Mamma and I, and we just got back. Tell me all about it, that is, if you feel able, but don't exert yourself. Oh, I wish I had hold of that man." And Mary Nestor clenched her two pretty little hands, and set her white, even teeth grimly together, as though she would do most desperate things indeed. "I wish you did too," exclaimed Tom. "That is, so you could hold him until I had a chance at him. But I'm all right now. It was very good of you to call. How are you, and how are your folks?" "Very well, but I came to hear about you. Tell me." She looked anxiously at Tom, while Mrs. Baggert discreetly withdrew to the adjoining room and made a great noise, rattling papers and moving chairs about. Thereupon Tom told what had happened, while Mary Nestor listened interestedly, and with expression of fear at times. "But if Andy had anything to do with it," concluded Tom, "I can't understand what his object is. Andy is acting very strangely lately. We can't locate him, nor find out where he is building his airship. That's what I want to know. But Mr. Damon and I, after a lot of trouble, only found his airplane shed empty." "And you want to find out where Andy Foger is building his aeroplane, which he has entered in the big race?" asked Miss Nestor. "That's what I'd like to know," declared Tom earnestly. "Only we can't seem to do it. No one knows." "Why don't you write to Mr. Sharp, or someone of the Aviation Meet Committee?" asked the girl simply. "They would know, for you say Andy made his formal entry with them, and the rules require him to tell from what city and state he will enter his craft. Write to the committee, Tom." For a moment the young inventor stared at her. Then he banged his fist down on the arm of his chair. "By Jove, Mary, that's the very thing!" he cried. "I wonder why I never thought of that, instead of fiddling around in disguises and things like that. I wonder why I never thought of that plan. "Perhaps because it was so simple," she answered, with a pretty blush. "I guess that's it," agreed Tom. "It takes a woman to jump across the bridge to a conclusion every time. I'll write to Mr. Sharp at once." End of Chapter 12. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas. Chapter 13 of Tom Swift and His Sky Racer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Sky Racer by Victor Appleton. Chapter 13. A Clash with Andy. Tom lost no time in writing to Mr. Sharp. He wondered more and more at his own neglect in not before having asked the balloonist, when the latter was in Shopton, where Andy was building his aeroplane. But as it developed later, Mr. Sharp did not know at that time. While waiting for a reply to his letter, Tom busied himself about his own craft, making several changes he had decided on. He also began to paint and decorate it, for he wanted to have the Humming Bird present a neat appearance when she was officially entered in the great race. Miss Nestor called on Tom again, and Mr. Damon was a frequent visitor. He agreed to accompany Tom to the aviation park when it was time for the race, and also to be a passenger in the $10,000 contest. "It must be perfectly wonderful to fly through the air," said Miss Nestor one day, when Tom and Mr. Damon had the Humming Bird out on the testing ground, trying the engine, which had been keyed up to a higher pitch of speed. "I consider it perfectly marvelous, and I can't imagine how it must seem to skim along that way." "Come and try it," urged Tom suddenly. "There's not a bit of danger. Really there isn't." "Oh, I'd never dare do it," replied the girl with a gasp. "The machine is too swift by name and swift by nature for me." "Why don't you take Miss Nestor on a grass-cutting flight?" Tom suggested Mr. Damon. "Bless my lawn-mower, but she wouldn't be frightened at that." "Grass-cutting?" repeated the girl. "What in the world does that mean?" "It means skimming along a few feet up in the air," answered the young inventor, who had now fully recovered from the effects of the blow given him by the midnight intruder. In spite of many inquiries, no clues to his identity had been obtained. "How high do you go when you cut grass, as you call it?" asked Miss Nestor, and Tom thought he detected a note of eager curiosity in her voice. "Not high at all," he said. "In fact, sometimes I do cut off the tops of tall daisies. Come, Mary, won't you try that? I know you'll like it, and when you've been over the lawn a few times, you'll be ready for a high flight. Come, there's no danger." I almost believe I will," she said hesitatingly. "Will you take me down when I want to come?" "Of course," said Tom. "Get in and we'll start." The Humming Bird was all ready for a trial flight, and Tom was glad of the chance to test it, especially with such a pretty passenger as was Miss Nestor. "Bless my shoelaces!" cried Mr. Damon. "I can see where I'm going to be cut out, Tom Swift. I'll not get any more rides with you, now that Miss Nestor is taking to aeroplaning, you young rascal," and he playfully shook his finger at Tom. "Oh, I don't expect to get enthusiastic over it," said Miss Nestor, who, now that she had taken her place in one of the small seats under the engine, appeared as if she would be glad of the chance to change her mind, but she did not. "Now, if you take me more than 5 feet up in the air, I'll never speak to you again, Tom Swift," she exclaimed. 5 feet it shall be, unless you ask to go higher," was the youth's reply, as he winked at Mr. Damon. Well, he knew the fascination of aeroplaning, and he was almost sure of what would happen. "You can take a tape measure along and see for yourself," he added to his fair passenger. "The barograph will hardly register such a little height." "Well, it's as high as I want to go," said the girl. "Oh!" with a scream, as Tom started the propeller. "Are we going?" "In a moment," was his reply. He took his seat beside the girl. The motor was speeded up until it sounded like the roar of the ocean surf in a storm. "Let her go!" cried Tom to Mr. Damon and Mr. Jackson, who were holding back the Humming Bird. They gave her a slight shove to overcome the inertia, and the trim little craft darted across the ground at ever-increasing speed. Miss Nestor caught her breath with a gasp, glanced at Tom, and noted how cool he was, and then her frantic grip of the uprights slightly relaxed. "We'll go up a little way in a minute," shouted Tom in her ear, as they were speeding over the level ground. He pulled a lever slightly, and the Humming Bird rose a little in the air, but only for a short distance, not more than 5 feet, and Tom held her there, though he had to run the engine at a greater speed than would have been the case had he been in the sustaining upper currents. It was as if the Humming Bird resented being held so closely to the earth. Around in a big circle, back and forth went the craft, at no time being more than 7 feet from the ground. Tom glanced at Miss Nestor. Her cheeks were unusually red, and there was a bright sparkle in her eyes. "It's glorious!" she cried. Do you think there's any danger in going higher? I believe I'd like to go up a bit." "I knew it!" cried Tom. "Up we go!" And he pulled the wind-bending plane lever toward him. Upward shot the craft, as if alive. "Oh!" gasped Mary. "Sit still, it's all right," commanded Tom. "It's glorious, glorious!" she cried. "I'm not a bit afraid now." "I knew you wouldn't be," declared the young inventor, who had calculated on the fascination which the motion through the air, untrammeled and free, always produces. "Shall we go higher?" "Yes!" cried Miss Nestor, and she gazed fearlessly down at the earth, which was falling away from beneath their feet. She was in the grip of the air, and it was a new and wonderful sensation. Tom went up to a considerable distance. For once a person loses his first fright, 100 feet or 1,000 feet elevation makes little difference to him. It was this way with Miss Nestor. Now indeed could Tom demonstrate to her some of the fine points of navigation in the upper currents, and though he did no risky stunts, he showed the girl what it means to do an ascending spiral, how to cut corners, how to twist around in the figure 8, and do other things. Tom did not try for great speed, of which he knew his craft was capable, for he knew there was some risk with Miss Nestor aboard. But he did nearly everything else, and when he sent the Humming Bird down, he had made another convert and devotee to the royal sport of aeroplaning. "Oh, I never would have dared believe I could do it!" exclaimed the girl, as with flushed cheeks and dancing eyes she dismounted from the seat. "Mama and Papa will never believe I did it." "Bring them over, and I'll take them for a flight," said Tom with a laugh, as Mary departed. Tom received an answer to his letter to Mr. Sharp that night. "Andy Folger's entry blank states," wrote the balloonist, "that he is constructing his aeroplane in the village of Hampton, which is about 50 miles from your place. If there is anything further I can do for you, Tom, let me know. I will see you at the meet. Hope you win the prize." "In Hampton, huh?" mused Tom. "So that's where Andy has been keeping himself all this while. His uncle lives there, and that's the reason for it. He wants to keep it a secret from me, so he could use my stolen plans for his craft, but he shan't do it. I'll go to Hampton." "And I'll go with you," declared Mr. Damon, who was with Tom when he got the note from the balloonist. "We'll get to the bottom of this mystery after a while, Tom." Delaying a few days to make the final changes to his aeroplane, Tom and Mr. Damon departed for Hampton one morning. They thought first of going in the Butterfly, but as they wanted to keep their mission as secret as possible, they decided to go by train, and arrive in the town quietly and unostentatiously. They got to Hampton late that afternoon. "What's the first thing to be done?" asked Mr. Damon, as they walked up from the station, where they were almost the only persons who alighted from the train. "Go to the hotel," decided Tom. "There's only one, I was told, so there's not much choice. Hampton was a quiet little country town of about 5,000 inhabitants, and Tom soon learned the address of Mr. Bentley, Andy's uncle, from the hotel clerk. "What business is Mr. Bentley in?" asked Tom, for he wanted to learn all he could without inquiring of persons who might question his motives. "Oh, he's retired," said the clerk. "He lives on the interest of his money, but of late he's been erecting some sort of building on his back lot, like a big shed, and folks are sort of wondering what he's doing in it. Keeps mighty secret about it. He's got a young fellow helping him." "Has he got red hair?" asked Tom, while his heart beat strangely fast. "Who, Mr. Bentley? No, his hair is black." "I mean the young fellow." "Oh, his? Yes, his is red. He's a nephew or some relation to Mr. Bentley. I did hear his name, but I've forgotten it. Sandy or Andy, or some such name as that." This was near enough for Tom and Mr. Damon, and they did not want to risk asking any more questions. They turned away to go to their rooms, as the clerk was busy answering inquiries from some other guests. A little later supper was served, and Tom, having finished, whispered to Mr. Damon to join him upstairs as soon as he was through. "What are you going to do?" asked the eccentric man. "We're going out and have a look at this new shed by moonlight," decided Tom. "I want to see what it's like, and if possible, I want to get a peep inside. I'll soon be able to tell whether or not Andy is using my stolen plans." "All right, I'm with you. Bless my bill of fare, but we seem to be doing a lot of mysterious work of late." "Yes," agreed Tom, "but if you have to bless anything tonight, Mr. Damon, please whisper it. Andy or some of his friends may be about the shed, and as soon as they hear one of your blessings, they'll know who's coming." "Oh, I'll be careful," promised Mr. Damon. "Andy will find out sooner or later that we are in town," went on Tom. "But we may be able to learn tonight what we want to know, and then we can tell how to act." A little later, as if they were merely strolling about, Mr. Damon and Tom headed for Mr. Bentley's place, which was on the outskirts of the town. There was a full moon, and the night was just right for the kind of observation Tom wanted to make. There were few persons abroad, and the young inventor thought he would have no one spying on him. They located the big house of Andy's uncle without trouble. Going down a side street, they had a glimpse of a shed built of new boards, standing in the middle of a large lot. About the structure was a new, high wooden fence, but as Tom and his friend passed along it, they saw that a gate in it was open. "I'm going in," whispered Tom. "Will it be safe?" asked Mr. Damon. "I don't care whether it will be or not. I've got to know what Andy is doing. Come on, we'll take a chance." Cautiously they entered the enclosure. The big shed was dark and stood out conspicuously in the moonlight. "There doesn't seem to be anyone here," whispered Tom. "I wonder if we could get a look in the window." "It's worth trying anyhow," agreed Mr. Damon. "I'm with you, Tom." They drew nearer to the shed. Suddenly Tom stepped on a stick, which broke with a sharp report. "Bless my spectacles!" cried Mr. Damon half aloud. There was silence for a moment, and then a voice cried out: "Who's there? Hold on! Don't come any farther! It's dangerous!" Tom and Mr. Damon stood still, and from behind the shed appeared Andy Foger and a man. "Oh, it's you, is it, Tom Swift?" exclaimed the red-haired bully. "I thought you'd come sneaking around. Come on, Jake. We'll make them wish they'd stayed home." And Andy made a rush for Tom. End of chapter 13. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas. Chapter 14 of Tom Swift and his Sky Racer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and his Sky Racer by Victor Appleton. Chapter 14. The Great Test. "Bless my gizzard!" exclaimed Mr. Damon, who hardly knew what to do. "We'd better be getting out of here, Tom." "Not much!" exclaimed the young inventor. "I never ran from Andy Foger yet, and I'm not going to begin now." He assumed an attitude of defense and stood calmly awaiting the onslaught of the bully. But Andy knew better than to come to a personal argument with Tom, and so the red-haired lad halted some paces off. The man, who had followed young Folger, also stopped. "What do you want around here, Tom Swift?" demanded Andy. "You know very well what I want," said the young inventor calmly. "I want to know what you did with the aeroplane plans you took from my house." "I never took any," declared Andy vigorously. "Well, there's no use discussing that," went on Tom. "What I came here to find out, and I don't mind telling you, is whether or not you were building a monoplane to compete against me, and building it on a model invented by me, and what's more, Andy Foger, I intend to find this out, too." Tom started toward the big shed, which loomed up in the moonlight. "Stand back!" cried Andy, getting in Tom's way. "I can build any kind of aeroplane I like, and you can't stop me." "We'll see about that," declared the young inventor as he kept on. "I'm not going to allow my plans to be stolen and a monoplane made after them, and do nothing about it." "You keep away!" snarled Andy, and he grabbed Tom by the shoulder and struck him a blow in the chest. He must have been very excited, or otherwise he never would have come to hostilities this way with Tom, whom he well knew could easily beat him. The blow, together with the many things he had suffered at Andy's hands, was too much for our hero. He drew back his fist, and a moment later Andy Foger was stretched out on the grass. He lay there for a moment, and then rose up slowly to his knees, his face distorted with rage. You hit me!" he snarled. "Not until you hit first," said Tom calmly. "Bless my punching bag, that's so!" exclaimed Mr. Damon. "You'll suffer for this," whined Andy, getting to his feet, but taking care to retreat from Tom, who stood ready for him. "I'll get square with you for this. Jake, come on, and we'll get our guns." Andy turned and hurried back toward the shed, followed by the evil-looking man, who apparently had been undecided whether to attack Mr. Damon or Tom. Now the bully and his companion were in full retreat. "We'll get our guns, and then we'll see whether they want to stay where they're not wanted," went on Andy threateningly. "Bless my powder horn, what had we better do?" asked Mr. Damon. "I guess we'd better go back," said Tom calmly. "Not that I'm afraid of Andy. His talk about guns is all bluff, but I don't want to get into any more of a row, and he is just ugly and reckless enough to make trouble. I'm afraid we can't learn what we came to find out, though I'm more convinced than ever that Andy is using my plans to make his aeroplane." "But what can you do?" "I'll see Mr. Sharp and send a protest to the Aviation Committee. I'll refuse to enter if Andy flies a model of my Hummingbird, and I'll try to prevent him from using it after he gets it on the ground. That is all I can do, it seems, lacking positive information. Come on, Mr. Damon, let's get back to our hotel, and we'll start for home in the morning." "I have a plan," whispered the old man. "What is it?" asked Tom, narrowly watching for the reappearance of Andy and the man. "I'll stay here until they come, then I'll pretend to run away. They'll chase after me and get all excited, and you can go up and look in the shed windows. Then you can join me later. How's that?" "Too risky. They might fire at you by mistake. No, we'll both go. I've found out more than enough to confirm my suspicions." They turned out of the lot which contained the shed and walked toward the road, just as Andy and his crony came back. "Well, you'd better go," taunted the bully. Tom had a bitter feeling in his heart. It seemed as if he were defeated, and he did not like to retreat before Andy. "You'd better not come back here again either," went on Andy. Tom and Mr. Damon did not reply, but kept on in silence. They returned to Shopton the next day. "Well," remarked Tom, when he had gone out to look at his Hummingbird, I know one thing. Andy Folger may build a machine something like this, but I don't believe he could put in all the improvements I have, and certainly he can't equal that engine, huh, Dad?" "I hope not, Tom," replied his father, who seemed to be much improved in health. "When are you going to try for speed?" asked Mr. Damon. "Tomorrow, if I can get it tuned up enough," replied Tom, "and I think I can. Yes, we'll have the great test tomorrow, and then I'll know whether I really have a chance for the $10,000. Never before had Tom been so exacting in his requirements of his aircraft, as when, the next day, the Humming Bird was wheeled out to the flight ground and gotten ready for the test. The young inventor went over every bolt, brace, stay, guy wire, and upright. He examined every square inch of the wings, the tips, planes, and rudders. The levers, the steering wheel, the automatic equilibrium attachments, and the balancing weights were looked at again and again. As for the engine, had it been a delicate watch, Tom could not have scrutinized each valve, wheel, cam, spur, gear more carefully. Then the gasoline tank was filled, the magneto was looked after, the oil reservoirs were cleaned out and freshly filled, and finally the lad remarked: "Well, I guess I'm ready. Come along, Mr. Damon." "Am I going with you in the test?" "Surely. I've been counting on you. If you're to be with me in the race, you want to get a sample of what we can do. Take your place, Mr. Jackson. Are you ready to time us?" "All ready, Tom." "And, Dad, do you feel well enough to check Mr. Jackson's results? I don't want any errors." "Oh, yes, Tom, I can do it." "Very well, then. Now this is my plan. I'm going to mount upward on an easy slant, and put her through a few stunts first to warm up, and see that everything is all right. Then, when I give the signal, by dropping this small white ball, that means I'm ready for you to start to time me. Then I'll begin to try for the record. I'll go around the course in a big ellipse, and, well, we'll see what happens." While Mr. Damon was in his seat, the young inventor started the propeller, and noted the thrust developed. It was satisfactory, as measured on the scale, and then Tom took his place. "Let her go!" he cried to Mr. Jackson and Eradicate, after he had listened to the song of the motor for a moment. The Humming Bird flew across the course, and a moment later mounted into the air. Tom quickly took her up to about 2,000 feet, and there, finding the conditions to his liking, he began a few evolutions, designed to severely test the craft's stability and to learn whether the engine was working properly. "How about it?" asked Mr. Damon anxiously. "All right," shouted Tom in his ear, for the motor was making a great racket. "I guess we'll make the trial next time we come around. Get ready to drop the signal ball." Tom slowly brought the aeroplane around in a graceful curve. He sighted down and saw the first tall white pole that marked the beginning of the course. "Drop," he called to Mr. Damon. The white rubber ball went to the earth like a shot. Mr. Jackson and Mr. Swift saw it and started their timing watches. Tom opened the throttle and advanced the spark. The great test was on. The Humming Bird trembled and throbbed with the awful speed of the motor, like a thing alive. She seemed to rush forward as an eagle dropping down from a dizzying height upon some hapless prey. "Faster yet," murmured Tom. "We must go faster yet." The motor was warming up. Streaks of fire came from it. The exhaust of the explosions was a continuous roar. Faster and faster flew the frail craft. Around and around the air course she circled. The wind appeared to be rushing beneath the planes and rudders with the velocity of a hurricane. Had it not been for the face protectors they wore, Tom and Mr. Damon could not have breathed. For 10 minutes this fearful speed was kept up. Then Tom, knowing he had run the motor to the limit, slowed it down. Next he shut it off completely, and prepared to volplane back to Earth. The silence after the terrific racket was almost startling. For a moment Neither of the aviators spoke. Then Mr. Damon said: "Do you think you did it, Tom?" "I don't know. We'll soon find out. They'll have the record," and he motioned toward the earth, which they were rapidly nearing. End of chapter 14. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas. Chapter 15 of Tom Swift and His Sky Racer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Sky Racer by Victor Appleton. Chapter 15. A Noise in the Night. "Well, did I make it? Make any kind of record?" asked Tom eagerly, as he brought the trim little craft to a stop after it had rolled along the ground on the bicycle wheels. "What do you think you did?" asked Mr. Jackson, who had been busy figuring on a slip of paper. "Did I get her up to 90 miles an hour?" inquired Tom eagerly. "If I did, I know when the motor wears down a bit smoother that I can make her hit 100 in the race, easily. Did I touch 90, Mr. Jackson?" "Better than that, Tom, better than that," cried his father. "Yes," joined in Mr. Jackson. "Allowing for the difference in our watches, Tom, your father and I figure that you did the course at the rate of 112 miles an hour." 112? gasped the young inventor, hardly able to believe it. "I made it 115, said Mr. Swift, who was almost as pleased as was his son, "and Mr. Jackson made it 111. So we split the difference, so to speak. You certainly have a sky racer, Tom, my boy." "And I'll need it too, Dad, if I'm to compete with Andy Folger, who may have a machine almost like mine." "But I thought you were going to object to him if he has," said Mr. Damon, who had hardly recovered from the speedy flight through space. "Well, I was just providing for a contingency, in case my protest was overruled," remarked Tom. "But I'm glad the Humming Bird did so well on her first trial. I know she'll do better the more I run her. Now we'll get her back in her nest, and I'll look her over when she cools down, and see if anything has worked loose." But the trim little craft needed only slight adjustments after her tryout, for Tom had built her to stand up under a terrific strain. "We'll soon be in shape for the big race," he announced, "and when I bring home that $10,000 I'm going to abandon this skyscraping business, except for occasional trips." "What will you do to occupy your mind?" asked Mr. Damon. "Oh, I'm going to travel," announced Tom. "Then there's my new electric rifle, which I have not perfected yet. I'll work on that after I win the big race." For several days after the first real trial of the sky racer, Tom was busy going over the Humming Bird, making slight changes here and there. He was the sort of lad who was satisfied with nothing short of the best, and though neither his father nor Mr. Jackson could see where there was room for improvement, Tom was so exacting that he sat up several nights to perfect such little details as a better grip for the steering lever, a quicker way of making the automatic equilibriumizer take its position, or an improved transmitter for the wireless apparatus. That was a part of his monoplane of which Tom was justly proud, for though many airplanes today are equipped with a sending device, few can receive wireless messages in mid-air. But Tom had seen the advantage of this while making a trip in the ill-fated Red Cloud to the cave of the diamond makers, and he had determined to have his new craft thus provided against emergencies. The wireless outfit of the Humming Bird was a marvel of compactness. Thus the days passed, with Tom very busy, so busy, in fact, that he hardly had time to call on Miss Nestor. As for Andy Folger, he heard no more from him, and the bully was not seen around Shopton. Tom concluded that he was at his uncle's place, working on his racing craft. The young inventor sent a formal protest to the Aviation Committee to be used in the event of Andy entering a craft which infringed on the Humming Bird, and received word from Mr. Sharp that the interests of the young inventor would be protected. This satisfied Tom. Still, at times, he could not help wondering how the first plans had so mysteriously disappeared, and he would have given a good deal to know just how Andy got possession of them, and how he knew enough to use them. He or someone whom he hired must have gotten into our house mighty quickly that day, mused Tom, and then skipped out while Dad fell into a little doze. It was a mighty queer thing, but it's lucky it was no worse. The time was approaching for the big aviation meet. Tom's craft was in readiness and had been given several other trials, developing more speed each time. Additional locks were put on the doors of the shed, and more burglar alarm wires were strung, so that it was almost a physical impossibility to get into the Hummingbird's nest without arousing someone in the Swift household. "And if they do, I'll guess we'll be ready for them," said Tom grimly. He had been unable to find out who it was that had attempted once before to damage the monoplane, but he suspected it was the ill-favored man who was working with Andy. As for Mr. Swift, at times he seemed quite well, and again he required the services of a physician. "You will have to be very careful of your father, Tom," said Dr. Gladby. "Any sudden shock or excitement may aggravate his malady, and in that case a serious operation will be necessary." "Oh, we'll take good care of him," said the lad, but he could not help worrying, though he tried not to let his father see the strain which he was under. It was some days after this, and lacking about a week until the meet was to open, when a peculiar thing happened. Tom had given his Hummingbird a tryout one day, and had begun to make arrangements for taking it apart and shipping it to Eagle Park, for he would not fly to the meet in it for fear of some accident, so big cases had been provided. "I'll take it apart in the morning," decided Tom, as he went to his room after seeing to the burglar alarm, "and ship her off. Then Mr. Damon and I will go there, set her up, and get ready to win the race." Tom had opened all the windows in his room, for it was very warm. In fact, it was so warm that sleep was almost out of the question, and he got up to sit near the windows in hope of feeling a breeze. There it was more comfortable, and he was just dozing off and beginning to think of getting back into bed when he was aware of a peculiar sound in the air overhead. "I wonder if that's a heavy wind starting up," he mused. "Good luck, if it is. We need it." The noise increased, sounding more and more like wind, but Tom, looking out into the night, saw the leaves of the trees barely moving. "If that's a breeze, it's taking its own time getting here," he went on. The sound came nearer, and then Tom knew that it was not the noise of the wind in the trees. It was more like a roaring and rumbling. "Can it be distant thunder?" Tom asked himself. "There is no sign of a storm." Once more he looked from the window. The night was calm and clear, the trees as still as if they were painted. The sound was even more plain now, and Tom, who had sharp ears, at once decided that it was just over the house, directly overhead. An instant later he knew what it was. "The motor of an aeroplane or dirigible balloon!" he exclaimed. "Someone is flying overhead." For an instant he feared lest the shed had been broken into and his Hummingbird taken, but a glance toward the place seemed to show that it was all right. Then Tom hastily made his way to where a flight of stairs led to a little enclosed observatory on the roof. "I'm going to see what sort of craft is making that noise," he said. As he opened the trap door and stepped out into the little observatory, the sound was so plain as to startle him. He looked up quickly, and directly overhead he saw a curious sight. Flying so low as to almost brush the lightning rod on the chimney of the Swift home was a small aeroplane, and as Tom looked up, he saw in a light that gleamed from it 2 figures looking down on him. End of chapter 15. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas.
Chapter 16 of Tom Swift and His Sky Racer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Teresa Sheridan. Tom Swift and His Sky Racer by Victor Appleton. Chapter 16. A Mysterious Fire. For a few moments, Tom did not know what to think. Not that the sight of aeroplanes in flight were any novelty to him, but to see one flying over his house in the dead of night was a little out of the ordinary. Then, as he realized that night flights were becoming more common, Tom tried to make out the details of the craft. "I wish I had brought the night glasses with me," he said aloud. "Here they are," spoke a voice at his side, and so suddenly that Tom was startled. He looked down and saw Mr. Jackson standing behind him. "Did you hear the noise, too?" the lad asked the engineer. "Yes, it woke me up. Then I heard you moving around, and I heard you come up here. I thought maybe it was a flight of meteors you'd come to see, and I knew the glasses would be handy, so I stopped for them. Take a look, Tom. It's an aeroplane, isn't it?" "Yes, and not moving very fast, either. They seem to be circling around here." The young inventor was peering through the binoculars, and, as soon as he had the mysterious craft in focus, he cried, "Look, Mr. Jackson! It's a new kind of monoplane. I never saw one like it before. I wonder who could have invented that. It seems something like a Santos Dumont and a Blériot with some features of Cornu's helicopter. That's a queer machine." "It certainly is," agreed the engineer, who was now sighting through the glasses. In spite of the darkness, the binoculars brought out the peculiarities of the aeroplane with considerable distinctness. "Can you make out who are in it?" asked Tom. "No," answered Mr. Jackson. "You try." But Tom had no better luck. There were two persons in the odd machine, which was slowly flying along, moving in a great circle, with the Swift house for its center. "I wonder why they're hanging around here?" asked Tom suspiciously. "Perhaps they want to talk to you," suggested Mr. Jackson. "They may be fellow inventors. Perhaps one of them is that Philadelphia man who had the Whizzer." "No," replied the lad. "He would have sent me word if he intended calling on me. Those are strangers, I think. There they are, coming back again." The mysterious aeroplane was once more circling toward the watchers on the roof. There was a movement on the steps near which Tom was standing, and his father came up. "Is anything the matter?" he asked anxiously. "Only a queer craft circling around up here," was the reply. "Come and see, Dad." Mr. Swift ascended to the roof. The aeroplane was higher now, and those in her could not so easily be made out. Tom felt a vague sense of fear, as though he was being watched by the evil eyes of his enemies. More than once he looked over to the shed where his craft was housed, as though some danger might threaten it. But the shed of the Humming Bird showed no signs of invaders. Suddenly the mysterious aeroplane increased its speed. It circled about more quickly and shot upward, as though to show the watchers of what it was capable. Then, with a quick swoop, it darted downward, straight for the building where Tom's newest invention was housed. "Look out! They'll hit something!" cried the young inventor, as though those in the aeroplane could hear him. Then, just as though they had heeded his warning, the pilots of the mysterious craft shot her upward after she had hovered over an instant the big shed. "That was a queer move," said Tom. "It looked as if they lost control of her for a moment." "And they dropped something," cried Mr. Jackson. "Look, something fell from the aeroplane on the roof of the shed." "Some tool, likely," spoke Tom. "I'll get it in the morning, and see what sort of instruments they carry. I'd like to examine that machine, though." The queer aeroplane was now shooting off in the darkness, and Tom followed it with the glasses, wondering what its construction could be like. He was to have another sight of it sooner than he expected. "Well, we might as well get back to bed," said Mr. Jackson. "I'm tired, and we've got lots to do tomorrow." "Yes," agreed Tom. "It's cooler now. Come on, Dad." Tom fell into a light doze. He thought afterward he could not have slept more than a half hour when he heard a commotion out in the yard. For an instant he could not tell what it was, and then, as he grew wider awake, he knew it was the shouting of Eradicate Sampson and the braying of Boomerang. But what was Eradicate shouting? "Fire! Fire! Fire!" Tom leaped to his window. "Wake up, Massa Tom! Wake up! De aeroplane shed am on fire, and de hummingbird will burn up. Hurry! Hurry!" Tom looked out. Flames were shooting up from the roof of the shed where his precious craft was kept. End of chapter 13. Recording by Teresa Sheridan.